We continue to look back and break down the 2022-23 season for the LA Kings and maybe take a peek ahead. To help us with that and more, we are going to be joined by Jesse Cohen of the All the Kings Men podcast on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and we are also on YouTube as well. Please like and subscribe if you are enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. Also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 16 years, and of course, a passionate LA Kings fan for the past 30 years. As we continue to process the fact that the Kings season has come to an end, we're happy to welcome in another voice to talk about this past season and maybe look ahead a bit as well. He is the host of the All the Kings Men podcast, the official podcast of the Los Angeles Kings. He is Jesse Cohen. Hey, Jesse, how are you?
Good, Eddie. Thanks for having me.
It is May the 4th. May the 4th be with you. Are you a bit of a Star Wars nerd at all?
Yeah. It's complicated. Let's just put it that way.
Okay. I do remember there was I think it was obviously Star Wars night with the LA Kings, and you were on the Bally Sports coverage and did some sort of a quiz with Derek Armstrong. It was like hockey player or Star Wars character. And I think he got them all right, but I'm pretty sure he didn't know any of the Star Wars characters at all.
No, we've done it 3 times now, the Star Wars names or hockey names, and I actually wrote the scroll 2 of the last times that we've done Star Wars night. You see the scroll up on the Jumbotron. So right. I mean, I definitely have a relationship with Star Wars, but like I said, if it was a Facebook status, it's complicated.
Okay. Well, I don't know if it's complicated with the LA Kings, but the season is over, and there's certainly varying opinions of the success level depending on what type of fan you are, I suppose. And this is all documented. I'm not trying to sound smart because I'm not, but I said I thought the Kings would finish third going into the season. I said they were a playoff team. And then when the playoffs started, I thought Oilers in 6 turned out to be the case. So certainly from my standpoint, it's hard to think that this team, didn't meet expectations that I had for them. But it's always disappointing when a team gets eliminated in the first round for the second year in a row. So what are your feelings about this season on the whole for the LA Kings?
When the season started, I believed that it was entirely possible that they would miss the playoffs and that it would be outside of their control. Vancouver had put on a really strong push the previous season. Calgary had finished top of the division, and Vegas was incredibly injured last year. And I believed that Edmonton, Vegas, Vancouver, and Calgary would all be strong contenders. The Kings could also be a strong contender and miss the playoffs, but still get better. But I also believed that if everything went the Kings' way, if every single check mark on your list went in favor of the Kings, that they could be a cup contender. I didn't foresee Vancouver repeating their season from last year. Weak finish, coaching changed, strong finish after the coaching change. And I didn't anticipate Calgary being struggling as much as they did. I don't want to say they were bad because they had a season where you can go back and point to a few things that if it had just broken right, they might have made the playoffs. But they struggled. Now they're without a head coach. And I would argue that that's the story of their franchise for almost the last 15 years, never quite knowing who they are. That's not about the Kings. The Kings had to reset their expectations twice in the middle of the season. The first time when Cal Peterson was assigned to Ontario, and the second time when they acquired Korpisalo and Gavrikov. So it's really hard for me to look at a season where they came in with question marks in my mind, created more question marks for themselves, and then answered questions that we didn't even know were going to be questions. I'm sort of tossing out word salad here, but they made the playoffs. They put up a strong front. I always felt that this offseason was going to be far more important than anything that happened during the season on the ice. And so I am not particularly upset or excited by what happened in the season. I'm far more curious about what will happen over the next 3 months.
Well, the man that will be guiding the LA Kings next season and possibly beyond is Todd McClellan. Rob Blake said in his exit interview that he's very satisfied with the coaching staff. But obviously, look, Todd McClellan has won a cup as an assistant. He's been a longtime NHL head coach. He's never been able to get the Stanley Cup as a head coach. So there's that. Your confidence level on Todd McClellan being the man to ultimately get the Kings where they'd like to be?
Well, where would the Kings ultimately like to be?
I think they'd ultimately like to win another Stanley Cup.
I don't think Todd McClellan has sole control over that ability.
Certainly.
I think that Todd McClellan is clearly a good teacher. We've heard that from his players. He told us over the course of the season that the systems that they have employed partially are built around the personnel that they have now, partially around the personnel that they saw when they took control of the team. He talked about the 1-3-1 and the role that the different defensemen play on it. And he looked at the depth and the prospects coming up, and he constructed a system that played to the strengths of the personnel he had. Personnel changes. And this summer, we're likely to see significant change in the personnel. So Rob Blake even said himself in the exit media, they would love to bring this roster back next year. The likelihood of that, because of the salary cap and the timing of different contracts, is unlikely. Does that require a significant change from a coaching staff to adapt to that? I don't know. I have faith that Todd McClellan will do what's best to compete with the roster he has. Whether or not one thinks that that is the best long-term goal for a franchise, that's up to each person.
From a non-roster standpoint, it would appear that the penalty kill would be the biggest issue. I know that going into this season, the power play was high on the list, and that was addressed. Jim Hiller came in, did a wonderful job. So going forward, I would assume by your reaction that is the biggest issue from a strategic standpoint, if you will, going forward.
Yeah. So Zach Dooley and I just did our sort of series recap and reaction to the exit media. And the phrase I sort of settled on is the penalty kill isn't why they lost, but it is why they didn't win. And I realize may seem like a subtle distinction, but Edmonton's power play is a problem for everybody. It's it's not unique to the Kings. Had they held them to a slightly less successful rate, maybe we're talking about a different series. Based on how much the power play improved from last season to this season, I am encouraged that with this coaching staff, like I said, if Todd McClellan sets his mind to something, I have faith in him that he will accomplish it. The power play went from a liability in 21-22, excuse me, to a strength in 22-23. It didn't go from a liability. It didn't go from a negative to a neutral. It didn't go from a neutral to a positive. It went from a negative to a positive. And I understand that Todd McClellan didn't do it by himself. They brought in Jim Hiller. Regardless, I didn't know that it was possible without serious roster changes to improve special teams that much. So Todd McClellan says their summer project is the penalty kill. I trust that the summer project will bear fruit.
We knew going into the season as well that goaltending was an issue, and it could certainly be the same type of issue going into this coming season. I want to ask you first about Phoenix Copley. I thought there was a legitimate argument to be made to start him in Game 6. Ultimately, I did agree with the decision to stick with Jonas Korpisalo. There have been examples, certainly in this postseason and others. Look at Akira Schmid in New Jersey, where you put in another goalie and it kind of changes your fortunes, at least in the short term. Were you okay with them sticking with Korpisalo, or did you think that Phoenix Copley should have gotten a chance?
I wouldn't have been upset if they put Copley in for Game 6, but I wasn't one of the people banging the drums thinking that it should happen. There are people who are related to me who are responsible for, fathering me, let's just say, who passionately believe that Phoenix Copley should have been given a chance. And I saw fans talking about it. And I understand the emotional appeal of the story,
Mhm.
it wasn't enough to sway me. It didn't convince me. If they did it, I would have been fine with it. Ultimately, I didn't think they lost because of Corpusalo, so it's
Yeah.
I don't have real strong feelings about it.
Gotcha. I'm actually the same way. More with Jesse Cohen in a moment. We're going to ask him what the Kings roster might look like next season and some other things as well. But first, real quick, I need to remind you that today's episode of Locked On LA Kings, your team every day, is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure that every player is the perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure that every part that you get is the right fit the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check mark to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game. And when you shop at eBay Motors, you've got over 122 million parts to choose from, and you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit at the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay's guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. We've got more with Jesse Cohen, host of the All the Kings Men podcast. And Jesse, in the interview, the exit interview that GM Rob Blake had, he was asked about Cal Peterson, indicated that Cal was still in the Kings' plans. I don't know that I'm real optimistic about him being able to turn into the goaltender the Kings hoped he would be once they signed him to the extension. What are your thoughts on the Cal Peterson situation?
I don't think a lot has changed since the middle of the season. Like, the best possible outcome is still Cal Peterson turns into the goalie they want him to be. You mentioned you're not optimistic about it. I get it. A lot of people aren't. I see people talking about it, but that's still the best possible outcome for the Kings. Is he rebounds as you know, as an NHL goaltender that the organization trusts to start significant games, and then he gives that performance. Whether or not they're willing to actually trust that that can happen, that's one of the questions of the offseason. It might be the biggest question of the offseason. I think, given the financial situation the Kings find themselves in, it's a tough. I mean, I'm trying to be real diplomatic about this. It's tough. It's really tough, right? The contract did not work out the way they wanted it to. It caused them to pivot twice in the middle of the season. And what do you do? Like, the best chance for the team moving forward is for him to turn into the guy they want him to, but you don't know if he will or not. So I don't know. I don't have a real good answer for that one. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I think a lot of fans are feeling that way as well.
Mm-hmm.
Going into this coming season, it certainly appears that the issues that needed to be addressed for the Kings could very well be issues again, like we talked about goaltending, also left shot defense. But are there any other areas that you would like to see the team try and address? I know it's been brought up on this show about the Kings' lack of size, as far as, is this roster built for playoff hockey from a physical standpoint? Any other kind of tweaks that you might see other than kind of the obvious?
So Zach and I were kind of struggling with this when we were doing our exit media recap and series recap, because anytime we've reached a point now where every part of the roster is interconnected with every other part of it because of salary. So yeah, goaltending and lefty are still trouble spots because the players they brought in to address those issues halfway through the season are unrestricted free agents. And so there's no guarantee that they'll even be back. Or, I don't know if the franchise even wants them back. Who knows? McClellan and Blake were complimentary of both players. Who knows if the players want to come back? So let's just say that theoretically someone decided that, Byfield was going to stay a wing forever. And I'm not saying this decision was made. I'm just throwing out hypotheticals. If Byfield stays a winger for the foreseeable future and you decide you need a third center, well, okay, are you fixing that problem internally or externally? If you fix it externally, you need to clear away a lot of money to bring in a valuable asset externally. Where's that money going to come from? It's going to come from your present roster. Well, okay, so you're going to move one player to bring in another one. You've just swapped holes on your roster. If it's going to come internally, that's great, but you got to tell me who that player is. So I've seen people say, well, put Jordan Spence and Brant Clark in the roster next year Problem solved. Well, okay, but you've got Dursey, Walker, and Roy all playing the same position as those two guys. You say, well, one of them can play lefty. You know what I mean? Like there is no one way to sort of point at one thing for me personally and say, this is the problem. This is what needs to be fixed. And we can put everything else to the side. It has to be treated like you're baking, right? You can't just worry about one ingredient when you're baking. It's how the ingredients come together and are mixed together, and how much you add of one and when you add it and how it interacts with the other ingredients. It has to be dealt with holistically. It cannot be looked at, in my opinion, as component parts. It's just too complicated at this point.
Well, we've seen Rob Blake certainly go out and make positive additions to the roster in the off seasons. Philip Deneau, Victor Arvidsson before last season, Kevin Fiala before this season, and at the deadline, Vladislav Gavrikov and Jonas Korpisalo. So he's not afraid to make some big moves, but we know with the salary cap situation, we're not likely to see anything like that this season, unless maybe there is a trade of some sort. I know that you mentioned it. There is a dearth of right shot defensemen, which are in demand. Is there, in your mind, is there anything out there from a trade standpoint that could be pulled off to help out the roster?
So for the last 2 years, I've been saying, much to Zach Dooley's chagrin, I've been saying that the team has too many guys. Mm-hmm. And they managed to find a way around that problem. But now we're at a point where there are too many guys. That's just, you can quibble with the phrasing of that, but, we just ran down the list of names on the right side of the defense, for example. I don't know what the trades will be, but if November rolls around and there haven't been fairly significant trades, I will be shocked. I couldn't tell you what I think they are. I'm not going to tell you what I think some of them ought to be. But yeah, I will be very, very shocked if there aren't trades between now and honestly the draft, because the draft is the perfect opportunity to move assets with cap hit on them for assets that don't. And that's really where we're at this point. If the team wants to improve in a meaningful way, in my opinion.
Last time we talked to you was before the Quentin Byfield move to the top line to wing.
Is it that long ago?
Yeah, believe it or not. And he certainly got a lot of great experience with the minutes that he got, and talking about his development going forward. I know there's always those out there that focus on the numbers, and I get that. But just your thoughts on the development of Quentin Byfield this year and how much those minutes on that top line, regardless of where he fits in next season, would benefit him.
I forgot that he missed so much time earlier this season. And we heard in the exit interviews that he had a fever for a month and he lost 25 pounds. That's brutal. So when you look at his career, and I know it's hard to say this, but if you look at his career and you take away the fact that he broke his ankle last year's season and that he missed a month this season with a fever, losing 25 pounds, and then he had to go back to Ontario to help build up that strength before they put him in the roster. He looked great in training camp before he broke his ankle. Everybody was looking at him going, this is a guy who has clearly come into training camp as a 19-year-old, I think at the time, and claimed a spot. And then this year he came in as a 20-year-old, started the season on that third line with, was it Velarde and Iafallo, I think, to start the season. That line looked real good. And then he had a fever for a month, went to Ontario. I really liked his play in Ontario. He got off to a slow start, which now looking back on it makes perfect sense. He was coming off of losing 25 pounds. And when I say a slow start, I'm talking like 4 games without a point in Ontario. That was the slow start. Then he went on to, I think it was 15 points in 16 games in Ontario. So despite the fact that he didn't have a point in his first stretch of games coming back from that illness, whatever it was, he was great in Ontario. He came up, he played 2 games on the fourth line, and then they put him on the top line with Kopitar and Kempe. And I do not believe that it's a coincidence that Anze Kopitar had one of his stronger seasons in recent memory as a result of not just Adrian Kempe scoring 40 goals and totally changing his game, but I think Quentin Byfield on that line had a lot to do with it. I really liked his season. He had a bad period in the playoffs. Like, it was rough. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it wasn't, right? There are 2 goals in game 5, 4. I don't remember which one it was. But yeah, he had a bad period in the playoffs. But this talk of him getting dummied or beaten up on or caved in the playoffs, I don't think is true. He's a kid. McDavid and Draisaitl are unbelievable. And I don't see the same amount of criticism of the other Kings players who are on the ice for a bunch of goals at the hands of 97 and 29. I don't see those same criticisms levied against Byfield. I think it's really unfortunate that he gets criticized for not being a superstar when he's, as far as I'm concerned, shown really solid progression despite missing half a season with a broken ankle and missing a season with a fever, or a month with a fever.
You brought up Anze Kopitar. We will ask Jesse Cohen if the Kings captain got screwed over. But first, the NHL playoffs are into round number 2. Can a Canadian team finally win the cup this season? Can the Cinderella Kraken continue to surprise, stay on top of all the Stanley Cup playoff action? With Locked On NHL, available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. That's Locked On NHL for recap and analysis of all the Stanley Cup playoff action. More with the All the Kings Men podcast host Jesse Cohen. And Jesse, are you still watching the playoffs? People have asked me who you're rooting for now, and I'm like, I don't really root for anyone but the Kings. But when I watch hockey, I'd love to see a good game. Maybe I'm a sucker for an underdog story as far as the Kraken go. They haven't been around long enough for me to develop a hatred for them. Are you still watching? Anything interesting that's going on with you with the playoffs?
So I usually don't watch the round after the Kings are out. So if they miss the playoffs, I'm usually reluctant to watch the first round. If they lose in the first round, I'm usually slow to rejoin in the second round. Last night, I watched the third period of Vegas versus Edmonton. I am not thrilled with how much I'm rooting for Vegas over Edmonton, but that's the choice I've made.
Yeah, I hear you.
Dallas is the team that I would like to see win.
Okay.
Because I have a couple weird rules. One is no new happy people. I don't root for underdog stories. I root against teams that have never won it. So Dallas has won it once in the past. They're a solid team. I can't name a single player on their roster that really upsets me. Pavelski doing well after leaving San Jose while San Jose crumbles into mediocrity would make me very happy. I think that's very funny. After Dallas, Seattle winning it would be very funny. Since Vegas has not yet, and for Seattle to come in and win it when Vegas didn't would be very amusing. And it would sort of prove everybody who said that the expansion rules being tweaked to help the expansion teams wasn't responsible for Vegas's early success. And I've had that fight with a bunch of people, and they say, no, it wasn't the rules. And I go, of course it was. They changed the rules to help the expansion teams. The expansion teams were helped. Ergo, the rules, it worked. So Seattle winning would be very funny to me. After that, Carolina, Florida, and New Jersey are all sort of equal in my mind. I'm not thrilled with the idea, but it's fine. Vegas, Edmonton, or Toronto would be a waking nightmare.
Well, especially Vegas or Edmonton. Yeah. So the NHL has started the process of naming the awards finalists, and congrats to Kings captain Anze Kopitar. He's a finalist for the Lady Being Award. But not for the Selke Trophy. I know that former King and TV analyst Jarrett Stoll took to social media to voice his displeasure, talked about the East Coast bias. I was certainly disappointed to see he wasn't a finalist as well. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think Jarrett's wrong. There is an East Coast bias. But also, I don't watch other teams as closely as I watch the Kings.
Yeah.
I just don't.
And especially that trophy. It's kind of, you have to watch that player a lot to know, right?
Yeah. And so I can't sit here and tell you that I know how good Boston's forward D. Like, I just don't know.
Yeah.
I think awards are done incorrectly in the NHL. And if you've got time, I'd love to tell you how I think they ought to be done, but we don't have to get into it.
Can you give me a quick version of it?
Sure. I think players in each division should nominate players for each award within their division. And then
they certainly would know. Yeah, they certainly would know, right?
Once those nominees are presented, then let the national media vote on it. Because I don't believe that people who have wives, kids, careers, hobbies, and cover one team have enough time in their life to know whether or not Patrice Bergeron, or I don't even know who else is nominated for the award.
Mitch Marner was one of them.
Okay. As well. Yeah, you're going to tell me that you watch enough Kings games, Boston games, and Leaf games to know how, like, no, there's no chance. Let the
Yeah.
players nominate.
No, I like that. I do like that. And by the way, you could be Eric Stevens and cover 2 teams for the Athletic. My God.
Eric has a tough job.
Oh man, I tell you what. So I wanted to ask you. We know the roster next season. Maybe there's not a lot of wiggle room, but the one addition we know is going to be Brant Clark, and I think everyone's going to be super excited to see what he can do. Oh, you got a face?
Do we
Making
know
a
that?
face? Making a
Do we know
face.
that?
Your thoughts then on Brant Clark with the LA Kings next season and playing a significant amount of time?
Well, Drew Doughty's not going anywhere, and Drew Doughty
Mhm.
plays a lot of minutes. Matt
Mhm.
Roy proved how important he is to this version of what the LA Kings are. The third, that leaves basically the third right D position. Are the Kings going to be able to move enough bodies to make room for Brant Clark? Is Brant Clark going to come into training camp and demonstrate to the team that he has done everything required to be a trusting player, as Todd McClellan likes to say? I don't think it's a lock. I think it certainly can be. I think the season he had in the OHL was unbelievable, but I won't be shocked if he starts the season in Ontario. I won't be shocked if he starts the season in LA either. I'm not trying to,
Gotcha.
and certainly nobody's told me one way or the other, but I think it'll come down to how he performs in training camp. And when I say performs, it's not even necessarily how he performs on the ice. I think a lot of people don't take into account that the evaluation of players has a lot more to do. Like we see, like let's say Brant Clark plays 2 games in training camp, the first 2 games of the preseason, and he gets, I don't know, let's say 20 minutes a game in 2 games. That's 40 minutes that we can all see with our own eyes and say, okay, he was a +3. He had 2 points. He did this. He did that. He got beat on this goal, but he did this in overtime. It's great. But there's practices, how he acts on the bus, how he interacts with teammates, how he is in meetings, what he does in, with the development coaches. Like there's so much other stuff that players do that they're evaluated on that determines their ice time. Ultimately, yes, what they do with the ice time they get is very, very important, but there's more than that. And so whether or not Brant Clark is on the Kings roster next year will have a lot to do with all of those things. And then on top of that, how he performs on the ice when he gets his opportunities.
I know that you are open about you being a self-proclaimed pessimist, I guess, by nature.
Yeah.
But are you optimistic about the trajectory the Kings organization is on at the moment?
I can't answer that because I need to know what happens this summer.
Okay.
This summer, I believe it's one of the reasons I was less upset about the playoffs. A phrase that I found myself repeating to a lot of people was, this summer is the playoffs for this team. Rob Blake will be judged on how he handles this summer. They have delayed on a lot of decisions that now can no longer be delayed on. And what the roster looks like when training camp starts will have a lot to do with how optimistic or pessimistic I am moving forward.
Well, last time we talked to you, I know you were promoting a project that you were working on where you did interviews with the 2012 Stanley Cup winning team. And I know that was a great experience for you. Any other projects planned for this offseason or anything else that you'd like to promote with the All the Kings Men podcast?
Well, everybody should go to lakings.com/podcast. We're certainly not going to slow down our coverage this summer. We've got player evaluations coming up. We will cover whatever, last year when the Fiala trade happened, I think we did 3 episodes on it surrounding it, including an interview with Kevin Fiala. So, yeah, we're not stopping. We have the 10 biggest questions facing the Kings in the offseason coming out next week. That, I think, will try and create a roadmap for people to follow because it is complicated, right? The salary cap, the restricted free agents with arbitration rights, unrestricted free agents, who's, waiver eligible to return to Ontario, all these things. I get it. It's complicated. We've had a lot of people reaching out, asking to clarify it. And unfortunately, it's really not easy to sit down and clarify. And I apologize to you for a couple of the answers I've given. The team's in a position right now where there aren't any easy sports talk answers, right? Like when they got Kevin Fiala, good trade, bad trade. Well, okay, I can answer that. it might not be true or it might be more complicated than that, but I can give you a take. This summer, it's tough. Gabe Velarde needs a new contract. Are they going to bring back Korpisalo or Gavrikov? Who knows? If they want to bring in somebody from outside, it's anyway.
I hear
I'm
you.
repeating myself, but anyway, LAKings.com/podcast. Like I said, we're going to be covering all of it as the summer moves on.
Excellent. Jesse, as always, great to have you on. Appreciate your time as always. And we'll check in with you at some point down the road.
Thanks for having me, and sorry for just talking too much.
No, that's what you're here for. Come on. All right, Jesse, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Eddie.
All right, that was Jesse Cohen again from the All the Kings Men podcast. Encourage you guys to check that out. And there's plenty of room for all the podcasts out there and all the different opinions and views. And we certainly support all the other podcasts out there as well. There's room for ours, there's room for theirs and others as well. So appreciate Jesse coming on and encourage you to check out that podcast as well. For you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on Friday's show, we're going to focus a bit more on what the Kings may look like for next season. By the way, if you were thinking, wasn't the Jesse Cohen interview supposed to be Friday? The answer is yes, but I had to call an audible because of my schedule. So that's the reason for that. We would love for you to stay connected with the show while we're not broadcasting. You can do that by following us on Twitter and Instagram at Locked On LA Kings. The email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE, lockedoneddie@gmail.com. Anything on your mind about the Kings, you're always encouraged to send an email at any time. It could be for one of our fan feedback shows or just a question for me, whatever. It's always encouraged. And we had a great fan feedback show this past Wednesday. If you missed it, please go back and check it out. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.